Hey, it's Carl with a K. Let's talk about Hollywood. Welcome to the show. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Let's Talk About Hollywood. The episode that you're about to listen to is about the Netflix Warner Brothers purchase. As you know, now Paramount, that initially didn't have the winning bid, has upped the ante by $20+ billion, and they want Warner Brothers Discovery. They want the whole thing. Okay, well, you know, this episode is geared towards people who work in the studio system, maybe work at Netflix, but this isn't for filmmakers. I mean, I'm not speaking directly to filmmakers and the agents and the talent that deal with studios. I'm someone who worked for Warner Brothers for 18 months when it was about to be bought by AT&T. This was 2016 to 2018 that I was there. And then I worked for a year at Netflix as a contractor, initially for 6 months, got extended for another 6 months. It made my career. It really did, as far as streaming. Even though I had started in streaming at Warner Brothers, Netflix took it to a whole other level. So what you're about to hear is really just a survival guide for the studio worker, the person who is working in streaming, maybe new to streaming, or maybe not in streaming at all, but working within the studio system. And what you'll hear me say, and I'll do it in different iterations, is not to panic, because it just doesn't get you anywhere, not to go around trying to make strategic alliances because you don't know who's going to come and go. A lot of this is out of your hands. So this is really just a survival guide that you're about to listen to. And I think it's really fascinating that the Warner Brothers sale has really just incited so many passions, right? Which is good because it shows that people care about storytelling. But this is also a lot deeper. It's about some people that don't like Netflix as a buyer are saying it's going to be a monopoly on content, which you'll hear me argue there was going to be a monopoly on content regardless of who had the winning bid. And then you have valid concerns too on the other side as far as Paramount being a potential owner, because then they're like, okay, it's going to be too much of a conglomeration of news, and it's just going to be another extension of the current administration. So you don't have to take my word for it. That is basically the back and forth that I'm seeing online. And so this isn't really about that. This is about how do you get through this working in a studio or potentially even at Netflix, because I've been through a lot of buyouts, which you'll hear. And a couple of quick updates, just because I did re-listen to the episode. There's a couple of things that I want to say. One is, at one point in the podcast, I'm talking about if you're at a studio right now and you don't know what's going to happen with your job, I'm saying when I was in that position, I still gave 110% because I was thinking about the consumer, right? I was thinking about the audience members who were paying for the streaming app. And that was before HBO Max even launched. And the DC Universe. Those are the two that I worked on before they were even a thing. And so in the podcast, I say, as far as approaching your job, that's within your control. But I'm not saying that it's within your control whether you get kept on or not, because sometimes you survive it, like I did. Netflix poached me from Warner Brothers, and it was the happiest day of my career. And on the Disney Plus side, when Disney bought out Comcast's share of Hulu, then even though I did a successful job and I did my best, I got laid off. So I'm not saying it's within your control whether you lose your job or not, potentially. Don't forget, this sale could take up to 2 years. A lot of things could change, so I'm not being negative. You'll hear that. And the second thing is, I was saying that with any merger, there are redundancies. And that's not saying that your particular job is redundant. I'm just saying that's the way that they think. So I've been through this. I know that part of this, any kind of sale or merger, there's some dispassion there. Everyone's not emo about it, and you'll hear my take on it, because tech companies are not as emo as the studios. And Netflix told everybody for years that they were not a studio. They're a tech company. And tech companies just have a different business model. So that's what I'm saying. I'm always on the side of talent. You're going to hear this episode that will guide you through some of this, because I've been there, and I'm an optimist. You know, as I say in the podcast, if anyone's afraid that this is the end of an era, we'll change it. It can be changed for the better, and we'll see where it goes, because ultimately, while it's a high stakes purchase that involves billions of dollars, it's ultimately got to satisfy consumers. So anything could happen. This is just updated so that you know that I am aware that that Paramount has now decided to try again. All right. So without any further ado, here's the studio workers' survival guide to a buyout. See you there. Hi, everybody. This is Carl, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of Let's Talk About Hollywood. How are you? Thanks for being here. I took off last week, December 3rd, because episodes usually drop on Wednesday. And so I took that off. I had interviews back to back. So I was prepping for those, and I knew it had been a little slow since the holiday, not so much for the podcast, just in general. So just figured, since a lot of people are catching up with season 1, just figured take a week off. And because more people listen than subscribe, I didn't send out a blast, because then it would have just been an email. I'm not recording today. So I just figured if people saw that there wasn't an episode, then they'd say, okay, there'll probably be one next week, and, not be concerned that I'd fallen off or wasn't doing them anymore. Because that's what happens sometimes with podcasts. People start and then they, fall off. And that's not going to happen here. Now, I can see taking a hiatus at some point, but I'll let you know when that's happening. Because usually people take hiatus between seasons, and I didn't really do that. I went from season 1 to season 2, and that's fine. I don't mind. But if there is a hiatus, I'll let you know, and you'll know when I'm coming back. Okay? But for now, we are together. This is episode 7, and let's check in real fast. So the big Hollywood news is that Netflix won the bid for Warner Brothers Discovery. Now, you can Google all the specifics. I'm not being lazy about it. I have some thoughts. And, look, I'll just be honest with you. First of all, I love streaming. That is what I pivoted to. That is my passion. So any library, most studio libraries or content tech company libraries, because Apple considers themselves a tech company. Netflix does as well. I'm just saying, I worked at Netflix before, as I told you. It was a very positive experience. I would work for them again. They always were like, we're not a studio, we're a tech company. Okay, so Apple's video catalog, streaming catalog, Netflix's, all of the major studios, Plex, the smaller ones like FilmRise, Criterion. I love streaming, period. I love the options of it. So if you've been familiar with this podcast, I am pro content. I am pro artist. I am pro writer. I am pro below the line. I am pro everything that goes into storytelling. So that's first of all. Now, so, there was Warner Brothers was up for sale, and the bidders were Paramount and Comcast and Netflix. Those are the three major ones that I'm aware of. And Netflix won. And so there's been a lot of press about it. There's been a lot of, I've read from different people, so like Jane Fonda said, it's a constitutional crisis. There are unions who are gonna, telling Netflix, like, hey, if you're gonna do this, commit to making more content. There are people that are worried that Netflix is going to somehow destroy the theatrical window that, most movies have when they are first on the big screens. And then I've also read that Paramount's not very happy about it because they thought it was kind of like a sure thing. They had the money. But if you read deep dives about it, or you read, say, Financial Times article about the sale, I think it came out December 7th, Sunday. It's pretty fascinating. It seems that Netflix just pretty much laid low, kind of acted like they weren't interested. All of these things are fascinating. And hey, look, I'm not knocking Paramount. I'm just going to say this because, a lot of people are just like, this is going to be too big of a monopoly. Well, it was going to be if that's the way that people are thinking about it, it was going to be too big a monopoly no matter who bought it, right? So if Comcast had succeeded, then you'd have Netflix plus Peacock plus Universal's library plus NBC's library. And if Paramount had succeeded, then you'd have Paramount Plus, then you'd have all of the CBS content, all of the Viacom content. So I don't know. I feel like it was going to be a conglomerate either way. And Paramount, look, all I can say is maybe Paramount, they've been getting a lot of press. The Ellisons have been in the news. David and Larry, they've got all this money, and plus they've had all of this news controversy because they're who they've hired to handle their news and what they're trying to be like. And maybe they got caught up in that because they were getting a lot of free press and really looking like players. And then here came Netflix and just got it done. And it's kind of funny because in the beginning, of course, with Hollywood, when Netflix started getting really successful, which was pretty much instantaneously, everyone was, Netflix is going to eat the streamer's lunch. Netflix is going to eat the studio's lunch. Well, I wouldn't say they're eating their lunch, but they're buying the whole pantry. And so it's going to be interesting. And I tell you this, I think I'd say my 10 cents would just be for what it means for labor. Now, first of all, this could take 2 years or more to go through. Maybe less, maybe more. But I can tell you, I've been on the side of this before. I was at Warner Brothers when the AT&T deal was trying to go through. And that was in 2016. And I remember that being a big deal because the administration didn't like CNN, and there would be picketers sometimes outside the adjunct studio or at the studio itself. And that was really intense because when a studio is up for sale, there's a lot of things that aren't happening. They're not hiring. They're really just trying to keep everything as in place as it can be so that the potential buyer knows where they stand. So it wasn't like while you were waiting for the deal to go through, that all of a sudden there were all these upgrades in tech and everything else like that. It's still pretty much business as usual, right? Just a little more stressful. And then there's also, is it going to go through? Because there needs to be, federal approval of it at a government level. So I've been through many buyouts. I've been through them with private equity in the publishing realm. I've been through it on the studio realm. I was at Tubi when Tubi was a startup and Fox Corporation bought it. I was at Disney when Disney bought Comcast's share of Hulu. So I've been there for a lot of this. And I worked through the strike and I still got laid off. And I was doing a good job. So things happen. I'm not trying to freak anybody out. All I'll say is this. I think from a labor standpoint, if you are that person, regardless of where you work, and we all, and I'm not speaking to you all as an audience, but I'm saying if you know someone like this, because if you work in this industry, or even if you don't, right, there's always those people maybe that have, just kind of lost their mojo for the work, or they've they start phoning it in. Someone goes to Trader Joe's at 2:30 in the afternoon and oops, they just don't come back, but they leave their light on in their office, or they leave their laptop on the desk. So it looks like they're coming back, but they've been gone, and you're going to end up doing their work. And so it goes. And so I would say for those people who are phoning it in, I would say over these holidays, honey, you better find your mojo, because Netflix, when I got in at the studio level, yeah, there'd be 2 or 3 interviews, right? HR, supervisors, director. So like a 3-prong interview system. With Netflix, it's HR, it's a manager, then there's a panel, then there can be in person with the executives. So it's a much more intense process. And so, yeah, Warner Brothers, or anytime this happens, any studio can say, hey, they're going to keep everyone that they can. And I'm not trying to panic anyone. I'm just saying, having been through this before, does the studio or the person or the entity that won the bid, do they need 2 of everything? Do they need 2 vice presidents of this? Do they need 2 senior managers of this? There are redundancies. And so I don't think I can tell you from experience, I don't think when these buyouts happen, or they're potentially about to happen, I don't think panicking is a good thing, because you can be premature. You can just jump the gun, and it's not necessary. And it's just not sustainable to keep that kind of level of stress going, right? So that doesn't work. And I've written about it on LinkedIn. If you look at any of my posts, I've talked about it. So you don't want to panic. You really just want to keep doing the very best job that you can. I've seen people, go around and start thinking of strategies and who they need to buddy up to. And it's all out of your hands. You have to stay present. You have to see how it's going to go down. As I've always said about Hollywood, it is not the swimming with sharks. The sharks are always around, just like in the ocean, right? You get into the ocean, you get into the sea, the sharks are there. That doesn't mean that they bite you. They can. But really what it is do they smell fear, panic, the metaphorical blood in the water? That's what matters. You see what I'm saying? So if you're in a situation where your company just got bought out, or is potentially going to be bought, and it's going to go through, you just need to keep calm, keep doing the great job that you're doing now. And I know that it can be thankless I did the best job that I could, and I still got laid off. But that's something that's not out of your control. What was the alternative? To do a shitty job? Because really, it wasn't even so much about my directors or the EVPs, because I was always going to be professional and do what was best for our team. But it really was about the audience. And I always knew, like, if I'm phoning this in, or if I were to not be doing the best job, then that doesn't serve the customer who's paying for this. It's not like it's a free service, and it's not. It costs money, and it's an attention economy. People are spending their time. So that's my thought on that with Netflix. I just say for the talent pool, just step it up, because, not saying that you're not, but if you aren't, then step it up, because Netflix is no joke. It's a rigorous process, and I just don't see how that doesn't come into play in hiring. I just don't. And hey, and it can work out. I first interviewed for Netflix I think I've said this in a past episode. I first interviewed for them in 2016. This was when they were in Beverly Hills. This was right after the Emmys, so there was so much going on. And I got interviewed. I was on site, so I went onto the campus, and I was interviewed by two people, half hour each, who asked the same identical questions, like they were identical. And I answered them, not identically, but, pretty much the same thing, just some variants and all that. And I remember that I did not get the job because my agent told me that I had come across as too laid back, which I thought was really, like, I wasn't sitting there in a lotus position. I wasn't like wearing sandals and like, hey, I'm so laid back. I didn't even know what that was all about. And then when I interviewed again 2 years later, then I got it. And I think that also helped because I had been referred. So referrals are a big thing, and I know they're hard to come by. I'm raising my hand right here because I know referrals really count. But the state that Hollywood is in right now, I think with people really just trying to hold on to their own jobs, I just think I don't see it I didn't see it for myself at a level where I was being referred a few times. So don't get me wrong. There would be a former employer, or a former employee, I should say, or coworker. So that happened at the Hollywood Reporter. It happened with some recruiters. So I'm not saying that people don't say, hey, I've heard of this job. That they do. But I'm saying in general, it's a very tight market. And I think now with this, with Netflix potentially acquiring Warner Brothers, you're just going to see a lot more panic. But again, I don't quite know where all the panic is coming from, because like I said, regardless of who was going to acquire Warner Brothers, it was going to be a big company. You need to have big money to buy a studio. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And I would just say now, if you're not necessarily into the tech aspects of what studio life kind of has become with streaming, and I got into streaming 10 years ago, so I just have more experience with it. There are people who have more experience than me, don't get me wrong, and I admire them, and I am all ears whenever they talk, or whatever their hacks are, or whatever their thoughts are. I mean, I find it fascinating, but I've been doing it for 10 years. If you're someone who has been a little reticent with tech and it's intimidating, now is the time to make friends with it and start learning, because that's just the direction that it's going. And there's a completely different mindset too, versus the studio way of thinking and the tech company way of thinking. And I think we saw that during the strike of 2023. I sure saw it. I knew it was coming. I knew when that strike happened, I knew that there was going to be maybe the more emotional pull and thought process that came with Hollywood, even though Hollywood played hardball, right? I mean, that was a long, hot summer and people walking around the block again and again and again, you know, day in, day out. Like I told you, looking at it from the studio windows, I was looking, it was like your siblings being locked out of the house. But you knew at some point it would end and they'd be allowed back in. It was just going to be, how long was it going to go? And I think it went longer because it wasn't just the Hollywood faction that was about tradition and feelings and relationships. I think it went longer because I think on the tech side of things, it wasn't so emotional. And for people maybe who had gone from Hollywood more into the tech realm, they had been burned before on the studio side. So, I mean, I just thought that, you know, there just wasn't the same emo factors that were going in on the tech side, and they had a say so in when the strike ended too. They were part of the AMTP. So I'll just say it'll be interesting. The industry is changing. It's changing in a lot of ways. And there's some people who don't think it is. I sure think it is. The very first episode I did of this season, I talked about the ways that I think it's changing. And I think it's shrinking. And I have 25 years of relationships and of knowing how this business works. And it's still been tough for me because I've also gone through 3 different iterations from acting to news to streaming. So when I started 20 some years ago, my mentors have retired, and then the people that I've just worked for will most likely be retiring within 5 to 10 years. So it's very interesting. I just say, keep your head up. The business will always surprise you. Right now, I don't think it's surprising at all. I think it's actually kind of predictable, unfortunately, but there are a lot of really exciting players and there's a lot of exciting technology. And so panicking isn't going to help. I would just say, do your homework, become more tech friendly, do your tech homework. And that doesn't mean become a coder or a programmer or a developer if it's not organic, but just see read biographies. I mean, my first year at Disney, I got a book by Steve Jobs from the top. Like, be inspired by this. I still haven't read it, but because it was a nice gift. But I'm just saying, I also had the Steve Jobs biography. Just start going back and seeing what some of these pioneers have done in the tech realm as much as you would knowing the pioneers that have come and done work in the studio realm. Because that merge has already been happening. And so there's just two different business models, really. And then the temperament and maybe the thought processes and the algorithms and everything else that goes with it, you can put that together how you will, how it works for you or doesn't. But I think consolidation is the thing. There's so many different business models now. And as I spoke of, I mean, even Netflix brought it up as one of their rationales for this bid. YouTube is huge, and YouTube isn't, quote, Netflix, right? And YouTube isn't Warner Brothers. YouTube is the ultimate AVOD there is. Advertising supported video on demand. You sit through a couple ads, They pop up here and there. Watch whatever you want. Or you can have your DVR in the cloud through YouTube, or you can pay so that you have a premium experience and no ads. So the business models are changing. So I think it's just going to be interesting. This is by no means over with. It bears watching, and I think it's just going to be fascinating. It is a new chapter in Hollywood, and for people who think that it's kind of like the end of the industry as we know it, I think the industry has already changed. I don't think it's the industry that we all knew. I think the basics are still there, but there's no way that the industry is still the same as it was even 10 years ago. And that's partly why I'm doing these journals. This episode isn't one of them, but when I do the episodes that are going back on the journals, that's where you can kind of see where things have changed. And it was never like it was easier to do the job. I think where it's easy are the people who are at the top of their game or on the way there. But for the rest of us who are proving ourselves and getting seniority and showing up and doing years and years of this, that's where the institutional knowledge comes from. And so that's what I'd say hold on to what you know. What you don't know, learn. It's all there at your fingertips. Don't panic. See how it plays out, and you can pick your lane. And if it's not something that you want to do anymore, then you don't have to. I think it'll be very interesting, but I think that train has left the station as far as, I'm just saying, a different business model and what we need to brace for. I think that this last year of static and no one hiring and everything else is just like, that's just the tip of it. I don't think that's even like that's going to look quaint a year or two from now. So I would just say if Hollywood is feeling so, that it's going to be the end of an era, well, it doesn't have to be. Just change the era. It's what Hollywood thinks it's done before. Been a game changer, a thought influencer ahead of the times. Behind the scenes, I don't think it has been. But, put that magic to the test. That's what I say. And I think it'll work out. It's going to have to. It's adaptation. That's not me being negative. I actually am trying to be positive. I mean, honestly, it's about adaptation. Silent films gave way to sound. Black and white films gave way to color. Television was a disruptor. Then cable was a disruptor. VHS was a disruptor. DVDs were a disruptor. Video games were a disruptor. Streaming music was a disruptor. I mean, and on and on. So it's be a student of the industry is all I'm saying. And I think the commonalities will start to show. I think some of the patterns will start to show. And ideally, the creative mojo and the creative force that makes this industry run worldwide will survive it. That's what I hope. And I think so. I think it will. We are not seeing people falling for. My favorite podcast is artificial intelligence. My favorite movie was made without a person. Like no one's that hasn't caught on. No one's doing that on any large scale right now. So it's worth preserving. It's worth, from pictures in caves to the screen, whether it's a theatrical one or a digital one or a plasma one. Stories get told, pictures get illustrated, and I just really don't think that that's going to go away. It doesn't have to go away if we don't want it to, but it is going to change. And so there's lots of conversation around that. I am not trying to summarize the whole entire thing. I'm just speaking from my own standpoint, in that I just think now is the time to really approach your career with what you want to do, the way that you want it to be, but knowing that it's still moving forward. We don't have to move forward with the things that don't work. And so I don't think these hiring freezes work. I don't think having a limited hiring range helps. I think we're an international business with international stories and international voices, and the human experience is the commonality. So it's not really that hard to do. It's just the stories that we tell, and everything else behind the scenes, that's their ride. And I'm not saying that it's fun, but it happens. And when it's your turn, my turn, then we can put those best practices forward. I know that I will. I'm always about telling stories. I'm always about the audience. I'm always about that, and so it'll be interesting, to say the very least. I just think panicking is premature. I'm just saying there's already a lot that people could panic about with this industry, but there's also ways that it can evolve and get even better. That's all I'm saying. They're just two different worlds. They're different, but there are a lot of commonalities, and I think that's what makes the industry exciting. So I think we've seen these things before. There have been a lot of mergers. And again, I've been through this in publishing. I've been through this at the studio level, and I've been through it at the streaming level. And so, I'm still a champion of this business. I'm forward looking. I think storytelling continues. I say be a student of the work. It's also educational. Understand these deals, understand the industry, understand the aspects of tech that you need to, or that are helpful, or that can be helpful to you, and understand Hollywood. And remember, as I always say, Hollywood's more of a psychology, and I think that it changes all the time. And so even with what I've gone through with the 600 resumes and the industry seeming to have ground to a halt over the last year, and it's not just me. I've come across so many people, some who have been laid off longer than I have, some who have put out even more resumes than I have. Not a lot, I have to say. I don't run across people who have put out almost 650 at this point, but something comes through, and it's still, you just become nimble, you become agile, you don't panic, and this can be a moment to really take stock and learn, feel it out, and you've got time. So just don't panic. That's the key. And it's just not good to panic, period. So that's my take on the merger, the potential merger. And that will do it for this episode. Notice I didn't do a mid-roll because it's outdated. I'm saying this podcast still does run on donations. It's just in my mid-roll, I say after 320 job applications, which is true, but now it's just more because that was also 3 months ago, almost. Yeah. So, look, yeah, it's no joke, man. But hey, I love doing this podcast. It runs on donations. So while the podcast is reaching 19 countries, and I thank my listeners and I thank those territories all the time. I'm just being honest. I didn't do this for the income. The donations help it run. And so that's what really will help this podcast if you're so moved. So you can find the donation link in the show notes. You can find it on my website, letstalkabouthollywood.com. But more importantly, it's just that we do have a bond here. We do have a community, and I'm never going to panic, and I'm never going to freak out, and I'm always going to be honest with you, and I'm usually going to be optimistic because that's just who I am, because I think anything else is just debilitating, and it's depressing, and it's just not always the best way to face these challenges. And I know that they can be shocking, and I know that they can be sad, and I know that they can cause anxiety, and they can cause real hardship. And I'm no stranger to that. I've shared with you about it, and there's more to share on that to come. But hey, we're going to get through this. We are in the 21st century. We can do a lot, you know? So I'll just say, if you feel so moved, feel free to donate to the podcast. And if you want to share or rate it, that's awesome too. And thank you for listening. I'm always thankful for you. I'm thankful that we got to talk about this sale potentially without it being a total freak out. I think it's going to age well. I do not think it is end times. I do not. And like I said, your opinion may differ. I just do believe that whoever was going to win the bid for Warner Brothers Discovery was going to have billions of dollars just for the intellectual property alone. And so it's just who was it going to be? And at least Netflix, in my opinion, has shown itself to be pretty resilient. It doesn't seem to have to play the same dog and pony show that some have felt that they have to do currently in this environment. Netflix is just water cooler stuff, man. People are always talking about it. I think it's something that has just become a utility. It's become a utility in American life. And so there's worse people or worse companies that could have bought Warner Brothers. That's what I'm saying. All right. I worked for them. And again, this was 7 years ago, and it changed my career. It really did. So we'll see what happens. Just keep your head and know that I'm on your side. And I hope that all of this made sense. And I'm glad that we could talk about it because it's timely. And I hope that you have a great rest of the week. Thank you again for listening. And don't forget, as always, love is real. And I wish you all great things. You know I do. And I will see you next week. Back to the journals. Take good care. And don't forget, come back. Bye.